All right, good afternoon, everyone. I have 1 o'clock, and I see that Eric has started the recording, so thank you. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We see lots of familiar names and faces, and so we really appreciate that. And we really appreciate all of the new names and faces that are joining us today as well. We're really excited to chat with you about Title III and some updates and an overview of Title III today. So I'm going to go ahead and progress this slide and let you know what we're doing. As we're working today, just some housekeeping and reminders. If you could please make sure that your microphones are muted and your cameras are off. There is actually one point in the presentation where we're going to ask you to turn on your camera pretty soon, actually, if you're comfortable. So we'll ask you to turn that on, and then we'll ask you to turn it off again as well, just to help with that bandwidth. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to put them in the chat, and we will try to answer questions along the way or at the end of the session for you as well. And just a reminder that this presentation is being recorded. So for those of you that don't know me, I am Susan Murphy. I work in the Office of Federal and State Accountability as a multilingual education coordinator, which was previously known as a Title III coordinator. Elizabeth and I are doing some rebranding, so we are now the multilingual education coordinators, and my contact information is listed here if you ever need to get in touch with me.
And I am Elizabeth Supan. I'm the other multilingual education coordinator along with Susan, and my contact information is there as well.
And then I'm Emily Williams. I work actually in the Office of Migrant Education, and I'm the IDNR and Services Coordinator. And there's also my contact information. Seriously, do not feel shy to reach out. Happy to talk anytime.
Thank you, guys. All right, so I hope that you had a great lunch and you have maybe a refresh of your coffee with you, because we have a packed agenda. We're going to start with an activity that we titled In My Shoes, which we'll go over in just a second. And then we plan to spend about half of the time on the Title III overview. And you can see a long list of items that we plan to just kind of touch on and go over with you guys. And then we also have the looking ahead, because the Title III office, we have been working really hard on some initiatives and making lots of great changes. So we are excited to share some of those with you today as well. So for this activity, this is the part where I'm going to ask you to turn on your cameras if you feel comfortable, and we hope that you do, because this is a fun little activity. So please go ahead and turn on those cameras. All right. Yay, I see lots of you popping on. Thank you. All right, so I'm actually going to stop sharing the screen, and then we'll continue the activity after, but you'll see why.
Okay, chicos y chicas, les quería pedir un favorcito, los que están ahorita prestando atención, gracias a los que ya tienen sus cámaras prendidas, lo aprecio mucho. Si podrías sacar una hoja de papel y escribir tu nombre, vas a hacer como un tipo de carpita para poner en la mesa, y así voy a poder saber cómo se llaman y conocer un poco más de ustedes. Entonces, si serían tan amables, sacar un papel, escribir tu nombre, doblarlo en la mitad para que yo pueda ver tu nombre, y así comenzamos, ¿ok? ¿Qué pasa con ustedes? ¿Por qué nadie me está prestando atención? ¿No están haciendo caso? ¿Me están mirando con caras de pescados, de peces? ¿Soy la única que vino lista para clase hoy? Parece que sí, ¿eh? ¿Nadie quiere participar o hacer un intento? Como que Brandon sí está agarrando la onda, ¿eh? Muy bien, Brandon. Gracias por venir a clase. Listo. Muy bien, Brandon. ¿Y los demás? Ni una pista, ¿eh? ¿Qué les pasa? Bueno, ¿qué haría con ustedes? ¿Quién está participando? ¿Esto? ¿Alguien que habla a lo mejor portugués? No creo que eso sea español. Ya, portugués, lo que pensé. Muy bien. Para usted que hable portugués, no hablo portugués. All right, vamos a intentarlo otra vez. So Brandon ya lo capta, creo que nuestro amigo que habla portugués o amiga, no puedo fijarme muy bien si eres amigo o amiga. So vamos a hacer una cosa. Vamos a sacar una hoja de papel, ¿ok? Vamos a sacar una hoja de papel. All right, muy bien, gracias. Saca tu hoja de papel. Lo vas a doblar en la mitad, ¿ok? Lo puedes doblar por así en la mitad. ¿Ok? Así. Muy bien. Y luego quiero que escribas tu nombre. ¿Ok? Your name. Vas a escribir tu nombre. Entonces, desde aquí puse mi nombre, my name, Emily. ¿Ok? So vas a sacar tu hoja, dóblala en la mitad. Y tercero, vas a escribir tu nombre. Write your name, ¿verdad? Your name, nombre. All right? Muy bien. Y así lo vas a hacer muy bien. No puedo ver las cámaras de todos, pero me parece que Susan y Elizabeth lo tienen. Brandon, ya sabemos que usted lo tenía antes. Muy bien, gracias a todos por su participación. I think we're good. Good job, y'all.
Thanks so much, Emily. All right, thank you guys for participating in that very, very mini sliver into what some of your students may be facing as you work with multilingual learners. I'm showing you this slide in English just to model how that could look. Obviously, this is a very simple activity, but how it could look if you are a teacher in the classroom and how you can provide those visuals and supports for your multilingual learners. So in the chat box, if you will, go ahead and write down, how did that activity make you feel? And what is something that you might be able to take away from that experience? I see confused, left out, empathy for multilingual learners, felt lost. I didn't feel connected until the visuals came up, absolutely. Frustrated. Left out that you need to learn Spanish. Empathy for our MLs. Oop, and now it's going too fast. I felt awesome because I understood, yeah, but worried about those that did not understand, absolutely. Inadequate, frustrated, confused. Awesome. Thank you guys. Oh yeah, I recognize some of the words, but not all of them. Absolutely. Disconnected. Feel the need to learn the mainstream language, which is English. Absolutely. Wonderful. So that is again the tiniest sliver into what our students can be feeling every single day in the classroom. And all of those feelings, if you could just imagine what our students are feeling, you know, is amplified of what you probably felt during that activity. So we are very, very passionate about the work that we do and the importance of serving our multilingual learners. So we hope that you can keep this in the background as we talk today and as you move forward working with multilingual learners. All right, so we're going to jump right in. Again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box along the way. Right.
Yeah, we're getting some more of that chat going about the takeaway is that we're feeling very frustrated. So what we want to do now is help you with some of that frustration you might have during the rest of our presentation by front loading some vocabulary that you might need to know. So you might already be aware that we're using the term multilingual learner. The multilingual learner it refers to the student. We're going to go over that a little bit more in a minute. They were previously known as limited English proficient or English learners or English language learners. English to speakers of other languages, that's ESSA. That's probably a term you're familiar with. That refers to the program. So when you're talking about ESSA, you're talking about a program, not the students themselves. And then English language proficiency, that refers to the ability to use the English language, and that's measured during our annual assessment, which is going on right now. A home language survey, which we'll reference throughout this presentation. You're probably familiar with that as well, but it is the initial registration for students. They fill out, or their parents fill out a home language survey, and we use that as our process of identifying our multilingual learners. It's the first step. And then finally, the other vocabulary that you'll need to know are program service delivery models. That refers to the type of services a multilingual learner will receive to support their English language development. So yes, I'm seeing that the visuals are helpful, so I'm hoping that visual slide was helpful to you as well. So let's talk a little bit about English learners. This is from the federal guidance referring to our students as English learners. They will refer to it as federal guidance as an English learner, but we are moving towards a multilingual learner, which we'll discuss on the next slide, in South Carolina, using a more, using a more asset-based approach on why we're using multilingual learners. This was sent out to districts a couple of months ago, explaining our reason for switching to the term multilingual learner. In South Carolina, we want to use what we call an asset-based approach to looking at our multilingual learners and realizing that a multilingual learner embodies the shared core values of diversity and inclusion, which are an integral part to the profile of a South Carolina graduate. The Multilingual Education, or ESSA program in South Carolina, will continue to grow and reflect these values to increase our multilingual learners' opportunities in South Carolina. So again, we're just using a more asset-based approach to knowing our students come to us with a lot of different assets, and it could be more than one language. The definition, the federal guidance for an immigrant, immigrant children and youth, you'll see us using that term for our immigrants. Immigrants are defined by the federal government and SEA as students that are ages 3 through 21. They are entitled to an education up until the age of 21. They're not born in any state, and they have not been attending one or more schools in one or more states for more than 3 full academic school years. That's how we define who an immigrant is. And then a state, the term state referring to all the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. One thing to remember is that an immigrant is not necessarily a multilingual learner, and a multilingual learner is not necessarily an immigrant. Most of our multilingual learners are actually born in the United States, but they could be defined as one or both or more than one. Okay. And one thing for us to cover really quick is just that the rights that protect our multilingual learners and our immigrant students. The forefront of that is the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and all of these subsequent laws and court order decisions protect multilingual learners from discrimination regarding their education. We need to remember that multilingual learners are entitled to an equal education, regardless of their national origin, their English proficiency, or their immigration status. Office of Civil Rights also requires school districts to take affirmative steps to ensure that students are not being excluded from participation in school-based programs because of their language proficiency. There are some resources at the end of this slide that kind of take us to those documents if you're interested as well.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the funding. As I go into this, it is a very brief overview, and at the end, we're going to talk about some initiatives that we have to make our guidance stronger and to share all of the great things that are happening across the state. But for now, here's the little overview. So the SCDE receives a total grant or an allocation from US Ed. And what happens with that grant is we hold 5% at the state. And then we have 2 different subgrants that we allocate to districts. So the first one is the what was previously known as the EL subgrant, and we're going to be calling that the ML subgrant to keep that terminology consistent. And that gets allocated out to all of our districts that are serving multilingual learners, and it is sent as a per pupil amount. We use this, and we're going to be changing the application a little bit as well. So this is a little bit new. It hasn't really been announced to our coordinators yet. We'll be announcing it at our next meeting in May as well with coordinators to give you guys an update. But we are going to be releasing the application in early July after the SCDE receives our grant. And then we're going to be giving districts about 60 days to complete their applications. Again, it's by a per pupil amount, and we pull that number from our 180-day count in PowerSchool. All of this is going to be outlined in our guiding principles as well, so that way districts know exactly, where the counts and the number of MLs is being pulled from, and same thing with the timeline for applications and things like that. Then we also have a second subgrant, which is the immigrant subgrant. And this one's a little bit different. We are allowed to hold about up to 15% to allocate out to the districts for the immigrant subgrant. This one is meant to be a smaller amount of districts that qualify, so that way they get a significant amount of money or funds to use for these purposes. And the immigrant count is actually taken by, it's a little confusing, the last 2 years. We find an average, and then we look at the current year at the 45-day count, and we are looking for a significant increase in the number of immigrant children and youth. So that's why we see a little bit less districts that qualify for this subgrant, because again, they need to see a significant increase in immigrant children and youth. You can see on the screen the timeline. We're going to be opening those applications around November for 30 days, and the LEAs who qualify will have about 30 days to complete that application. That subgrant is allocated a little bit later in the year, just due to we have to wait for that 45-day count to come in and then complete that allocation process on our end. And then all of the districts that do qualify, they do get a base amount of $5,000 plus the per pupil amount as well. So a little bit different with this subgrant, but we'll have that all laid out for you in our guiding principles, so that way districts are able to access that information. And then some allowable uses. So I'm going to go back to the ML subgrant first, which was previously the EL subgrant. There are 3 overarching allowable uses for this grant. There are lots of little pieces that can kind of go into each section, but the first one is the LEAP, the Language Instructional Education Program. And you'll see districts using this for possibly some resources, different like books or vendors that they use, applications, and it is all supplemental to the program. So everything for Title III does have to be supplemental. So we'd follow supplement, not supplant. So everything that they do for the LEAP, the instructional program that our multilingual learners are in, it does have to supplement that and go above the core requirements. The other piece is the professional development. Professional development around best practices with multilingual learners, and providing that to not only ESOL teachers, but to staff throughout the district as well. And then the third overarching area is the parent, family, and community engagement. So we also want to bridge that, bridge the partnership between families and the school. And we want to include, you'll see lots of districts pay for events. They might hold literacy events that are specific for multilingual families, or some of them may call it like ESSA nights, and being creative of how to bridge that gap and to bridge the partnership to bring families and the school together. And then the immigrant subgrant is similar to the ML subgrant of those allowable uses. Again, we follow the supplement, not supplant, for the immigrant subgrant. And then on the screen, I won't read all of this to you, but you'll see the law that's there of what are allowable uses for the immigrant subgrant. And again, this one we have to kind of switch that mindset to what Elizabeth mentioned before, is that not all MLs are immigrants and not all immigrants are MLs. So this subgrant is specifically for our immigrant population. So some of the allowable uses, again, you're looking at that instructional program and how to supplement that. You'll see again that parent and family engagement, different literacy events that are allowable, a lot of like support and personnel or staffing for different mentoring programs and things like that that are allowable as well. All right, so we're going to move into enrolling multilingual learners, or how we find out who our multilingual learners are. Just recently, in I think the beginning of March, The SCDE released a memo that is linked in here as well for you if you need to reference that. But really it's stating that we do have to enroll all students, excuse me, from ages 3 through 21, and that we cannot deny education to a student based off of their immigration status or English proficiency, and they do have the right to enroll into public schools. So one other area for this is the adult education piece, that although it might be an option for certain students, we definitely cannot promote that, or they do need to know that they have the right to enroll into a South Carolina public school if that is what they're choosing to do. So that is a big important piece, especially with our high school students. And then the other piece to this is that placement, right? So even if you do have high school students or any age students that are coming in 3 through 21, it does have to be an age appropriate placement. So that does include high school as well. However, the only difference with high school is that you do have to take into consideration possible transcripts or other information that might come in, because of course with that high school placement is based off of those credits. So students will need to be placed age appropriately, but then it might look a little bit different for scheduling due to whatever transcripts or information is coming in as well. Multilingual learners also need to have an equal opportunity for all other courses or extracurricular activities as well. All right, so how they're identified. So when they come in to enroll or register, they do receive the home language survey that Elizabeth mentioned earlier that the parents fill out. This is our current home language survey. We do have it in English and then 5 other languages as well that are posted to the SCDE website. It is important that all parents should have any documentation translated in a language that they understand. So if one of those 5 languages does not meet the needs of the parents, then it is an obligation to make sure that it is translated or explained to them in a language that they understand. This home language survey gets administered once, or supposed to be administered one time to the family upon their initial enrollment in South Carolina. And that actually starts in pre-K, so grades 3K through 12. There are 4 questions on the home language survey, and questions 1 through 3 are the ones that could potentially identify a multilingual learner. Question 4 is that communication from the parent of what language they would like to be communicated in with. After the home language survey, if they have a language other than English listed on the first 3 questions, then we move into ELP, or English Language Proficiency Screening. In South Carolina, we use a vendor, wida, and right now the allowable screeners are through that vendor, so you can see them listed on the screen. We currently use the K, or Kindergarten WAPT, and this one, wida, is actually transitioning, and we are about to start a new screener as well. So the KWAPT we are still using and are estimated to try to phase it out by December of this year. And then we're also going to be starting very soon the new screener. So it's called the wida screener for kindergarten. And then we have wida screener, which is grades 1 through 12. And then wida model is another version that is allowable as well. And they have K through 12 for that one as well. So based off of that screener, the students are going to receive a proficiency score. And based on that proficiency score, it would either qualify them for ESOL services or it would not qualify them for services. So we also have a requirement to annually assess the English language proficiency of our multilingual learners. And so that is done again through our vendor wida. There is a summative assessment called Access for ELS. And so we use that to annually assess the English language proficiency of our students. And then there's an exit criteria or reclassification criteria. In order to exit from the program, they have to score a 4.4 or higher overall and a 4.4 or higher in all 4 domains. And so English language proficiency testing does cover those 4 domains, listening, reading, writing, and speaking. We also have students who might have severe cognitive disabilities that take the alternate access for ELS, and their exit criteria would be a P1 on that assessment.
Okay, so we need to follow English language development or ELD standards. And what we are in the process of doing right now is taking the wida ELD standards framework to the South Carolina Department of Education for the process of adopting it, the new 2020 wida ELD standard framework. So we're in the process of doing that. We have to take it to the State Department in order for it to be approved. It also needs to be aligned with our annual assessment. So because they're from the same vendor, these are the ELD standards that we are trying to submit and will get approved. So we're looking for a gradual release of these ELD standards in 2021 through 2022 with full implementation the following year. These ELD standards are great because it gives a framework that bridges the gap between content and language objectives. And you can see at the bottom of the screen those 4 components of the wida ELD standards and what their statements are and how they all blend together to provide students with the language that they need in order to access the content. Right now, you can go to the wida store and get the free that are printable copies of the standards, or you can actually purchase those standards as well from the wida store. So our students who do qualify, like Susan said, under the screeners that we use in South Carolina, once they are screened and they are identified as a multilingual learner based on that screening, a team of stakeholders come together to create an individualized language acquisition plan, or an ILAP. This term is the one that we're using to show what that plan is. And the stakeholders that come together to create that plan should include the ESSA teacher, administration, the student in some cases, the content area teacher, and the parent perhaps. And what we want to do is make sure that the language acquisition plan that we put in place for those students are meeting them based on their language acquisition basement. So based on their proficiency, those individualized language acquisition plans are supposed to have the accommodations in there that give them just the right amount of support without over supporting what they might need to do. We want to make sure we're using the wida can-do descriptors to kind of guide what those accommodations would be within that plan. But there's also 3 levels. There's best practices, which are the best practices that are great for all learners, but it's also something that we're going to have in our guided principles that kind of lay out some of the best practices that are great for all language learners and all students actually. And then those accommodations are in that plan to, again, align with their English language proficiency. We also need to progress monitor our students, not only our students who are identified as multilingual learners, but the students who then exit the program. Those are going to be monitored. Those students will be monitored for up to 4 years just to make sure that they're still able to access the content and are still making progress and meeting standards. If they find this team comes together and finds that the students are struggling to meet the content, then they can have support put into place for those students. Again, we just want to make sure that they're still able to access the content and give them the support that they need throughout their school and for 4 years during that monitoring period. So the Language Instruction Educational Program, or the LEAP, these are the South Carolina approved program service delivery models that are being used in the state of South Carolina. They are the ones that our students should be able to receive services. These are the services they can use within your LEAs. So let's talk a little bit about grading and retention. What we know about retention of multilingual learners is it's not going to be in their best interest in most cases. So we really want that MET team to come together, that multilingual education team to come together to ask some questions about whether or not the student is making progress and whether or not their accommodations that have put in place are the right accommodations for them. Right now, this is the current guidance that's in the guiding principles document. We're going to talk a little bit about what that's going to look like moving forward. But right now, with grading and retention, we want to make sure that the student is able to access the content with the appropriate accommodations that are in place. Right now, we have a 3-tier approach for that. So if you'll go to the next one, we'll show what those pathways are. First of all, when a student is not meeting expectations or not meeting standard and they're not doing well in school and they're looking like they're going to have a possible retention, we need to bring that MET team together to discuss the progress that the student is making. If you find that language is an issue for the student, then that student should not be retained based on language. In pathway 2, you can see that language is not an issue, but you really just have enough ample evidence or documentation to support an accommodated instructional plan has been put in place for that student, and that student again should not be retained. In pathway 3, though, you find that language is not an issue for the student, and you have met as a team, the multi-education team has met, you've accommodated, you've maybe made adjustments to the ILAP plan, and you're just realizing that the student is not meeting expectation, not based on their language, and you have that strong evidence and documentation to prove that. That's the only opportunity, that's the only time where a student could possibly qualify for retention. Again, we don't support retention of multilingual learners. The research out there shows that it's not in their best interest. We want to do everything we can to make sure that we're meeting them and meeting their needs as they're learning not only the content, but language, learning the English language. There are some retention guidelines. These will be the ones that we're going to be putting and giving updated guidance about what those guidelines are. And I saw in the chat that people are interested in making sure that they receive this, so we'll make sure that you do. When you have a multilingual learner that's not meeting expectation and you want to bring that MET team together, these are some of those questions, guiding questions you want to ask within that team to see whether or not their academic performance is based on their development of the English language, and whether or not there's concern about that language holding them back or not. And if it's the language that's holding them back, that's when we would not want to make sure that we do not retain a student based on their language. And so we also want to make sure that we're bringing all of those stakeholders to the table whenever you do have a question or concern about a student, that it's not something that you wait until the end of the year and realize, oh my goodness, this multilingual learner is not passing. What are we going to do? This should be an ongoing and reciprocal process. An ILAP is something that's different than an IEP. An ILAP is fluid and can be readjusted throughout the school year. If you're finding that a student is not meeting expectations, you can adjust that ILAP and give them either more accommodations or less accommodations based on how they're doing within the classroom. So these are those guiding questions that should be explored when you have a possible retention. Again, making sure that those accommodations have been put in place and that the student is receiving all of the accommodations that they might need based on their language needs. On the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit, of course, a lot of people think about third grade retention and what that looks like because of the Read to Succeed law. This is the section of Read to Succeed. There is good cause exemption for students that are multilingual learners if they've had less than 2 years of instruction as an English as a second language program or in the ESSA program. There is a link when you get this document to the actual third grade retention guidance from the South Carolina Department of Education so that you have that in front of you and you'll know that we need to make sure that we're paying attention to that good cause exemption for our students.
All right, y'all. So I'm going to try not to be too terribly wordy and talk a little bit about parent engagement, which is one of my absolute favorite things to talk about. Like I said, I'm with the migrant education program. So while, you know, it's kind of a Venn diagram, right? We've got students who often are multilingual learners, or we've got folks who are also experiencing homelessness, maybe have an IEP, you know, right? Lots of umbrellas, lots of hats going on here. So I wanted to talk to y'all a little bit about parent engagement today. So one thing that I'd like you to just like take a minute, think about and center in your mind. I know you've got a lot going on, but is thinking about holding them in unconditional positive regard. This is a phrase and a concept that I read about a couple of years ago through a dear colleague of mine from the Head Start. It's this idea, right, that more or less within reason, there's really nothing, right, that the family or parent could do to make you not hold them in positive regards. So just kind of always thinking of, I respect this person because they are the parent of children that I'm working with or teaching, or working with as some sort of administrator. So always just kind of keeping that in mind when we're working with our parents. And just FYI, the pictures, it's only 2 or 3, but some of the pictures that we used for our this little section of the PowerPoint are actually all pictures of our staff and families from the migrant education program. So it's a huge part of what we do in migrant ed. We do a lot of home visits. We do a lot of going out, talking to the families, nights and weekends. I know a lot of y'all work with a lot of your families as well. So we're just gonna talk a little bit about kind of what does parent engagement sometimes look like, what are some tips and ways that maybe you can, if that's not an area that you either feel like you do pretty good at, but you need some more support from others at your school or district, or maybe that is an area that you'd like to work in and you're just not really sure how to approach it. Maybe you're great with the kids, but now when it comes to talking to the parents, you're like, ooh, now what do I do? And if you could move to the next slide. Thanks, Susan. So getting to know your families, right? Every time, so like in migrant ed, a lot of what we have to do is just finding the families, figuring out whether or not they qualify, filling out the certificate of eligibility and whatnot. So every time I sign up a family from a place I'm not familiar with, I take like 5 to 10 minutes just to Google where they're from. And even if I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm familiar with Guatemala in general, but maybe if they're for some like I'm sure a lot of y'all seen we're getting a lot of more families from like Huehuetenango. So at this point, like I've pretty got that area down. But maybe if they come from a home department, right, an departamento that I'm not as familiar with, I might take a little bit of time to Google it. This is where it helps to be multilingual, although you could, I'm sure, Google translate some of the things, right? And so you see like, okay, yeah, the first top 10 things that I got in a Google search were things about famine and local violence and lack of schools and a mudslide and a hurricane. You're like, okay, yeah, starting to kind of get an idea of what's going on, right? Or what, even if they've been in the US for a long time, what kind of stressors maybe are coming from home. You also just learn a lot about language and food. Maybe you find out they have some sort of beautiful waterfall nearby and you can kind of drop that, sprinkle that in a conversation the next time you're talking to them about like, oh yeah, I read that where you're from has beautiful waterfalls. How good would that make you feel if you were in, let's say, Germany, and somebody said something about like, oh, South Carolina, yeah, I hear y'all have great barbecue. Wouldn't you feel, oh, well, maybe that's just me, but wouldn't you kind of feel like, yeah, we do have good barbecue. Thanks for noticing, right? Again, I can't say enough about home visits. This is not at all just limited to teaching staff. I would actually highly encourage, because teachers are already getting to know those kids real well, right? I would highly encourage other staff, if and where possible, to do, even if you don't do a home visit, I get you've got literally in some of your cases thousands of students, right? Impossible for you to do a home visit with every single family, and every family wants you to come do a home visit. But for those who are open to it, or maybe kind of looking through those home visits and saying, all right, who can we kind of target who's really been on the struggle bus lately, maybe making sure that they know that you're going to whatever they've got going on at home, that you'll probably be cool about it, right? Maybe they're living on a porch, maybe they're living, if we're talking about like getting into a family, maybe they're living in what we would consider maybe not the best neighborhood or the best circumstances. Maybe they're doubled up in a motel with somebody, but just having that, that's okay. Well, I'm here with you. Let's have a little cup of tea and have a talk, right? If a picture is worth 1,000 words, a home visit must be up in the millions, as far as so many little things that you can catch on to, are kind of like, all right, maybe that's what's going on there, right? We had a family when I used to work at the Head Start who I was there because we did children like 6 weeks through, preschool or through kindergarten. And the child was starting to show developmental delays when it came to like tummy time and stuff like that. And so I went with the teacher to go do a home visit with mom, and the camp that they were living at was kind of like what we call these big barrack style housing for a lot of the migratory workers. Was super, it was really dirty, and people walking around and things on the floor. And so she didn't feel comfortable putting her child on the floor. That's why her child wasn't doing tummy time. Duh. So then we were able to find somebody who would donate a pack and play. We were able to help mom set up the pack and play at the house. Kind of the teacher was able to go over some of the tummy time stuff. And within a couple of weeks, that kid was back on those developmental milestones. That's just one example of how doing a home visit can be super helpful. Don't be afraid of that language line vendor. I know that language line is like the specific brand. I don't know what kind of brands you have in different districts, but don't be afraid of it. I've gone and helped out other programs, other migrant ed programs in other states, or maybe they have a lot of different languages going on. So guys, I don't only speak English and Spanish, and I can kind of get through the very beginnings of a little bit of Haitian Creole and a little bit of Portuguese, but not, definitely not enough to actually have any meaningful communication with somebody. And out there in Iowa, like I said, they had, Korean, and they had, which is not the same as Korean, I actually found out. And they've got Burmese, and they have Tagalog, and they have a bunch of Middle Eastern languages and Arabic and French, and anyway, a bunch of languages I don't speak. So use that language line. It's really not like, once you kind of get over, if you don't know how to use it, maybe ask somebody at your district so you're not kind of flustered in the moment trying to dial it and you're asking mom and dad to wait for a second while you can get that language line on. It's really actually, once you get used to it, it's really not as intimidating as you would think, like once you kind of get used to those steps. Having home languages that your staff doesn't necessarily speak right, so maybe hiring staff from those communities that speak that language. Again, I'm not saying by any means, let's not have the takeaway be Emily Williams said to let go of staff who aren't bilingual. Of course not. But as you're able to hire staff, think outside of the box. So like, okay, yeah, this position technically doesn't have to be, multilingual, but why not, right? Cool. This person, in addition to qualifying for being able to, do this job well, also speaks some of the languages that our families speak. That's awesome. One more person that the parents feel comfortable communicating with, which makes your school that much more of a welcoming place. So I would definitely advise doing that as you're hiring for new positions, posting for people who are multilingual, no matter what the job, even if they aren't a parent coordinator. Anybody who's multilingual will be an asset to your job. Meeting individual parents to get to know them more. Again, I know that sort of sounds great and hypothetically, but hard to actually pull off. But as you're able to meet those individual parents, even if it's just quickly at something, kind of try to make that personal connection for a few minutes. And I know a lot of you have already do that. If you got to pull out that language line again to be able to do it, you might have to. But I would highly suggest that goes a long way as well. Tell them, as cheesy as this is going to sound, tell them, I value your culture and your life experiences. Done it before. Families sometimes kind of give me this look like, all right, lady, that's kind of weird. But they appreciate it. It's nice to be told that, as again, kind of trying to come at things from an asset based, thinking of, I think you're interesting, especially we have a lot of within the Hispanic community, which I know that not all Hispanics are multi-language learners, right? And not all Hispanics are immigrants and all that kind of stuff. But amongst our kind of Hispanic immigrant population, there's a lot of folks who speak indigenous languages. And you'll hear it incorrectly called a dialect, but it's not a dialect, right? A dialect is the difference between how I speak and somebody from England speaks. You would not say that Cherokee is a dialect of English, right? Therefore, Mixteco, Nahuatl, Mam, Quiche, Concova, all these languages are not a dialect, right? They're indigenous languages, very old, Aztec and Mayan languages. So it's cool, right? That those families still speak those languages. So encourage that. They really appreciate it because they see educators for the most part as like, someone who they should hold in reverence, someone who they really respect. So they're going to really appreciate if you say, hey, it's cool that you speak an indigenous language and I think you should do it at home, right? Unfortunately, a smile is universal. Not all body language is universal, but a smile is. There's not a single language or culture or group in which smiling at somebody is seen as disrespectful. So that's the good news. And we can go on to the next one. I know we're running out of time. Again, it's going to take time to build that trust. Try to practice that unconditional positive regard. Here where you see it highlighted and to see the codes and whatnot are more links and resources you can look at. Cultural understandings of parent-teacher relationships is definitely something you want to keep in mind about being non-interventionist. There's a lot of cultures who kind of see it as my job as a parent is to not get overly involved in my kids' education because that's the job of the teacher. I don't want to tell the teacher what to do because I so respect the teacher, right? So instead of looking at it as like, they don't care about their kids' education. No, it's not that they don't care about their kids' education. It's that they don't think that it's appropriate for them to get involved in that way. Keep in mind, even if that isn't their culture, their individual relationship with the school, maybe they were bullied when they were little in school, and so they don't feel like school's a safe place. Maybe they come from a background where school is not emphasized. It's kind of like, if you have money and can afford the uniform and can drive your kid an hour away, great. If not, oh well, no big deal. Maybe they've been turned away. Unfortunately, at least in migrant ed, we work a lot with students and families who've been, for whatever reasons, feel like they've been told no by the school, either because they didn't have 8 million different pieces of paper proving where they lived, or maybe, there's an issue with the bus, or because of their age, or something like that. So they kind of feel like, I've already been turned away from school a bunch of times in a bunch of different states. I'm done with this, right? Feel honored as opposed to burdened when parents turn to you for help, right? If they ask you, hey, we're really falling behind on our bills, is somewhere we can help, says, can you help us with this? Where do we go for that? Don't look at that as like a, oh God, so needy. Or if you do, catch yourself, take a deep breath, and try to go back to that positive regard, right? To say, I am really flattered that this mom or dad is cool enough with me or caregiver, whoever they are, to come to me with that, right? Think about how much you would have to humble yourself to ask somebody for help. The fact that they think that you're a safe place to go to should make you, if it initially kind of overwhelms you, it should overall make you happy. I would love to talk. I'm trying to cram it all in, but more about East Coast Migrant Head Start Project has an awesome model of engagement. They have their parents on hiring committees. So like whenever I interviewed for the East Coast Migrant Head Start Project, there was a parent on that hiring committee who was helping make those decisions. They're not the ultimate word, of course, but they're there to say like, oh yeah, this person was nice, they weren't, whatever. Parents, approve the menus. So like obviously the menus have to be USDA compliant, but they might say like, hey, well, we need 2 vegetables of fruit, and a protein or whatever this meal. And the parents might say like, well, can we do rice and beans and this kind of fruit and vegetable that's, appropriate for my culture? It's a really cool way to get the parents involved, right? It's kind of outside of the box, outside of just a typical parent night or having them come into a teacher conference, right? Allowing parents to help decide a field trip budget, always important. Under this whole hiring business, by the way, anytime you have somebody who claims that they speak a language, definitely, if you don't already do this, hopefully this is already in your hiring practice, make sure that someone who actually speaks that language is there for the interview. I've had to do that a lot of times, where somebody's like claimed to speak Spanish, and so I sit in on the interview to make sure. Maybe some of you wouldn't be surprised, but I was unpleasantly surprised about how many people didn't think that nobody was going to test them on their Spanish skills. So definitely advise doing that. Luckily for us, again, not all of our students are from Central America who are MLs and or immigrants, but a lot of them are. And Central American cultures and the South are very similar, right? We've got usted and ma'am and sir. That's pretty much the same thing. They're all about time spent with family. They're all about being indirect, right? Beating around the bush because you don't want to just straight up tell somebody no. And again, like I was saying earlier, although smiling is a universal sign of respect, eye contact is not. And this goes for their kids too, right? So if you see like in class and their kids don't want to make eye contact with you, especially if you're mad at them, then they're really not going to want to make eye contact with you, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to show you I respect you. I'm staring at everything I can think of other than you, to show you that they respect you. So same with the parents, you're trying to engage with them and talk to them and you're smiling at them and they keep kind of looking around or looking somewhere else or briefly look at you and look at the ground, look at their shoulder, right? It's not that they don't think that you deserve respect. They're trying to show you how much they think you deserve respect. Already talked about indigenous languages, but as much respect to you as an educator as you can give those parents about their indigenous languages is hugely important. And just something to kind of like keep an eye out for. Sometimes parents aren't literate. They're either extremely low literacy. Maybe they only went to like kindergarten or first grade or a week or two of first grade, 10, 15 years ago, or they can't read or write at all. So if you kind of notice, like, I handed this to you in your language, but it seems like you never turned the paper right side up, or like, every time we send home written communication, mom and dad don't seem to respond, but they're pretty good about, if we hop on the phone with them, responding might mean that they're, and as you get to know them, they feel more comfortable with you, they might share that, or you could maybe politely ask like, so, hey, how far in school did you get? Maybe don't say, are you illiterate? But you could say, how far did you get in school in your home country? They might say like, oh, first grade, I never went, something like that. Even if they went to third grade, that's some pretty low literacy for an adult. We had a parent committee, a member of our parent committee actually, who was a secretary who was non-literate. But that was okay because she had a great memory. So she would help me remember what happened in the meetings. I would help, write up the minutes for her or whatever. And then she would kind of summarize, the next meeting out loud from her memory. And then I could just like help her out if there's 1 or 2 things that she'd forgotten. So there's that, be creative when it comes to our families. And I know we only got like 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna zip it. But y'all have my contact information. If I can throw it again in the chat, I'm seriously happy to talk to you anytime about, if this is something y'all are struggling with at your school or your district with engaging with families. It's one of my favorite things to talk about.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Emily. I don't think we can say enough about our migrant ed team. Emily and the whole team inspires us every single time, so we love working with you guys. And just a reminder that not every ML means that they're a migrant student. However, we do have an amazing migrant team working really hard, and what great resources that we have out there. So please utilize them because they are fabulous.
Yes, please do. And Emily has put her contact information in the chat in case you're wanting to just copy it over really quick. So looking ahead, Susan and I are very excited about that we're going to be splitting into state cohorts. We're going to have more information about this in our upcoming SIP and chat, which is on May the 6th, where we're going to kind of lay out what that will look like. But basically, we're splitting the state into two so that we can divide and conquer and help each individual LEA with their needs at their level. And speaking of their needs, we're going to be sending out this root cause analysis to each of the LEA leads so that you can kind of look at this as a self-reflection tool for us to be able to use this with our technical assistance for you. This is not supposed to be punitive in nature. It's for you to take a look at what you already have that's going great in your programs, and then areas where you might want some assistance from us. One of the ways that we're going to be looking at these cohorts is that we really want to build a relationship with all of you, and that's why we're dividing and conquering, so that we'll have a better ability to do that. And then use that through a coaching cycle. So it's not going to be a one and done. It's going to be a continuous process where you take this root cause analysis in year one, and we're going to take a look at that and kind of work with you about how to make your program stronger. And then even partner you with other districts that might be strong in something that you're looking for some help with, and kind of work and merge all of these processes together just to make everybody's program as strong as it possibly can be. So look for that in May.
Awesome. And connected to that root cause analysis to help support is the actual Title III monitoring tool. You guys will be getting this probably at the beginning of next year, so that way everybody has it. Currently, we're piloting about 6 districts who are kind of helping us walk through the RCA and the Title III monitoring tool, just so we can work out any of those kinks and make sure that we're providing you guys with the best resource possible. And so on this monitoring tool, you'll actually notice the same exact wording that's on the root cause analysis. So if you were to put them side by side, you'd see the same, I guess, criteria that's there. And then the other piece to that is examples of evidence. So this is where our required monitoring comes into play. And so for each different criterion, we're going to give you an example of what evidence could be sufficient to meet that need. And again, they're just examples. You might have something different or above and beyond from that as well. And then you're going to provide that evidence. So we're looking at about a 3-year cycle for monitoring our LEAs for Title III. And again, you guys will get this information. Hopefully, our estimated goal is for the start of next school year, so you know when to expect it. And then you'll also have a chance to put in any notes that go along with your provided evidence. And then the side on the right, the rating piece matches exactly how you kind of self-reflect in the RCA. This gives us a chance to do the same thing and to give you a rating, but then of course provide that feedback. Just like Elizabeth said, we don't want anything to be a one and done. We want it to be an ongoing coaching experience from our end, but also throughout the state, because so many of you are experts and doing amazing things, and we really want to make sure that that gets shared with everybody so we can all grow together. All right, so looking ahead, we are really excited for next school year. We have been working hard, lots of initiatives, but we're going to be sending out a survey to our coordinators very soon to discuss some stakeholder groups that you are willing to be a part of if you're interested. So some of the ones, and there may be more than this right now, these are the 6 that Elizabeth and I are doing. So we're going to be working on Title III, or the ML and immigrant subgrants, and specifically, we really want to dive into those allowable uses and dig deeper. So right now, like I gave you a very brief general overview earlier in the presentation, but we really want to dig into what are our districts already doing, what are other states doing, and where can we bring in all of these creative ideas that kind of go above and beyond what we're already doing. And then along with that is some clarification about the private school participation as well. We're also going to be working on building in an extra layer for the identification of multilingual learners. And then we're actually teaming up with the Office of Research and Data Analysis at the SCDE, ORDA, and they are building a database for us, and they have already started with some of our ESOL reporting that can be helpful, that all districts will have access to. And sorry about that. So we're going to be building upon that. And I know ORDA has already reached out to a few districts, but we're going to continue to build on that database for reporting purposes.
Okay, and our last three initiatives, the first one, the stakeholder group, will be endorsement, certification, and then that connection between that and the recommended ratio from the South Carolina Department of Ed. So we're going to be looking at what that endorsement looks like, what the certification looks like, and working with the Office of Certification to kind of shore that up a little bit and make sure that we have defining definitions of what those two distinctions look like and the reason for having both of them, or how we can merge them together and create what's best for our multilingual learners and the teachers who serve them. And then the next group will be the ILAP and progress monitoring and best practices. We really want to put those best practices I spoke about earlier into a handbook that's accessible for everyone to be able to have their hands on, knowing what those best practices are, again, like I said earlier, about how they're really just great strategies to use for all learners, but especially multilingual learners. And then using that to help us guide what will be in an iLab and then in our progress monitoring tools that we hope to be able to have some universal progress monitoring tools moving forward. And then finally, we'll have a group that is going to look closely at those ELD standards that we're adopting. And then with the dissemination of that and the professional development that goes along with that, and creating some great professional development for our teachers and staff throughout the state.
Awesome. And I know if you were in some earlier sessions, this was mentioned already, but we are very excited to let you know about the South Carolina Multilingual Education Kickoff. Last year, it was called the South Carolina English Language Acquisition Kickoff. And with our kind of rebranding and terminology changes, we're now calling it the Multilingual Education Kickoff. It is July 20th through 22nd, so please mark your calendars. Again, this is available to any educator or staff member in the state. We really encourage, of course, our ESOL teachers and administrators, but even your content teachers, because we're going to be supplying different sessions that are applicable to many, many different areas and people who work with our multilingual learners. If you or anybody in your district, please feel free to share this. We are accepting proposals to present your own session at the kickoff. Those are due April 2nd, and there's just a pretty quick form to fill out that gives us an overview of what ideas you have and what you'd like to see. And we'd love to have all of our representation from the state because, like we've mentioned, are wonderful, wonderful experts and great things going on that we'd love for you to share. So we hope you consider presenting. Otherwise, we'll have more information about the kickoff and the actual event coming out really soon. All right, Title III resources. So for those of you that are already in Title III, you probably know of all of these. But for everyone else, in your free time, please go ahead and read all of these documents. Elizabeth and I actually hold each other accountable, and we make sure that we revisit these quite often just to kind of stay refreshed, because there is so much that goes with the program in general. So these are some great resources if you ever need to dive into those. And then the next page, of course, has the toolkits as well, which are absolutely wonderful. We love these, and we're looking in them almost every day, probably. And then finally, we have our guiding principles. Right now, the published version is the 2020 version of the guiding principles, and we are in the process of updating that for the 2021-22 school year. And so we will have that released to you guys. We're trying to get it earlier rather than later, but we do have many great updates that are going into the guiding principles for you. Okay, we made it just in time.
Yeah, just in the nick of time.
So I'm going to put our contact information, but we are happy to hang out and answer any questions if anyone has them. Otherwise, just a huge thank you guys for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your efforts working with our multilingual learners.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. All right, thanks, guys. Awesome.